Several NHL teams are already entering sell mode this season, and the Boston Bruins have to decide where they stand so that they do not get caught in no man's land.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today is Wednesday, November 26th. Thank you so much for joining me, and today we are discussing the trade winds blowing in the NHL. Nick Kypreos of Sportsnet yesterday dropped his first big trade board that's causing quite a bit of conversation around the NHL, and there were no Bruins on that list, suggesting right now they're not really in sell mode. They're probably not in buy mode either. We're going to discuss where this team should be and tie it into the Bruins barometer. Are we buying this team? Are we selling? Or are we holding? We'll also preview tonight's game against the New York Islanders. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Before we get into today's conversation, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on socials at Locked NHL Bruins, primarily on X, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, also on Blue Sky if you're over there. Again, I'm your host, Ian McLaren. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan, and I have been covering this team and the NHL for various major outlets for nearly 20 years now. So as I mentioned, Nick Kypreos of Sportsnet dropped a trade board yesterday on that site and talked about how there are very few buyers, sellers kind of designated right now because there's a huge clump of teams still seemingly in playoff contention. And if you look at the NHL standings, you will see that kind of glut of teams still possibly in the mix, probably not, but the Bruins are one of those teams, certainly, that still believes they could be able to get into the playoff mix. And that is because right now they're still within striking distance and they're playing without Charlie McAvoy, Casey Mittelstadt, Victor Arvidsson, all of whom could make a big impact for this team upon their returns. The Bruins technically hold the second wildcard spot at the moment in the Eastern Conference. However, if you kick it to point percentage, the Bruins are in 13th. So it's this really tight middle ground. And if you look at the standings in the East as a whole, you have Carolina, first place, 30 points. You have the Maple Leafs down in 16th with 21 points. Actually the only team in the East under 500. So that just shows you how tight things are in the East. Out West, there are a few more clear sellers. You have the Nashville Predators, Calgary Flames, both under 400. The Vancouver Canucks, St. Louis Blues, under 500. Everybody else is 500 or above. The Colorado Avalanche are the clear best team in the league, but as Kypreos says, there's a cluster here that we don't usually see. And really right now, Calgary, Nashville, and perhaps Vancouver are the big clear sellers at this point. He's also keeping an eye on the Islanders, the Rangers, the Wild, the Oilers, the Canucks, Sharks, and Penguins. No mention here of the Bruins at all, which is curious because not even a few weeks ago, we saw a lot of talk about Pavel Zacha being highly sought after. Maybe Vancouver is interested in him, maybe Montreal. But as of right now, on this board, There's literally no mention of Boston or the Bruins. And actually, that is not true. There's one mention, and it's relation to Brandon Carlo. Nick Kyprios writes, the Leafs did explore trading Carlo last offseason, but couldn't get the right deal. There was strong suggestion Toronto and Buffalo were in talks over having Carlo involved in a JJ Peterka trade and then moving towards a Carlo for Bowen Byram type of trade over the summer. No idea why Buffalo would do that. Right now, Brandon Carlo is hurt, which will slow down any talks, and he hasn't had a great year on the ice either. And Carlo, according to Kyprios, still has some attraction to other teams. He could log big minutes, a right shot, still relatively young at 28 years old. Boston is eating $615,000 of his salary, so he'll count for just $3.485 million and possibly less if the Leafs retain some of that. Carlo has another season left on his contract, so an acquiring team would get him for 2 playoff drives, and he'll get a lot of respect in the trade market. Now, this is kind of hilarious because switch over to some Toronto outlets, specifically Blog.to, and the headline is 2 trades Toronto Maple Leafs made last season could haunt them for years to come. This is the cautionary tale right now for the Bruins. You think you may be in playoff contention, you may have a shot, you go for it, you give up some assets, but this is what could happen, right? The Leafs last year made a couple trades with the Bruins and the Flyers, picking up Brandon Carlo and Scott Laughton. And the motivation made sense. They had an uncertain future with Mitch Marner. They were trying to put everything in for a playoff run. They fell to Florida in Game 7 of the second round, despite being up in that series. Now, as a result of those trades, the Leafs won't have first-round picks in 2026. That was traded to Boston for Carlo, or 2027, which was traded to Philly for Laughton. The 2026 pick is top 5 protected. 2027 pick is top 10 protected. And Toronto, of course, also parted ways with Fraser Minton, who has been a staple in the Bruins lineup this season and is locking down that third-line center role right now. So if Toronto's pick falls into the top 5 of the 2026 lottery, they could bump the pick back a year, meaning they'd still be able to land a top prospect this year, and then Bruins would get the 2027 pick, Flyers would get 2028. But if the pick lands 6th or later, they'll have to be parting with it. So either way, Toronto will be without 2 first-round picks in the next 3 years in a time when they could be using them to help a rebuild and when they are at the bottom of the Atlantic Division. So the Bruins need to be really careful here in terms of where they go. Do they want to try to flip some younger guys who have not yet cracked the roster for more immediate help? Do they want to take advantage of perhaps a seller's market where the prices, if Brandon Carlo could fetch a big package 2 years in a row, then yeah, it's worth looking at what they might be able to get once again, because even if they squeak into the playoffs, I don't think anybody in this listening radius truly believes they can do much damage in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Now, you do not want to waste another prime year of David Pastrnak's career. You do not want to waste a red-hot Morgan Geekie who's leading the league in goals right now. You don't want to waste a prime year from Charlie McAvoy when he comes back, Jeremy Swayman's resurgence. They do have some pieces to be a decent team right now, but the market being what it is, you have to decide what you want to do so that you're not left in no man's land, kind of just missing the playoffs, not getting in the lottery, kind of getting a, mid first round pick. It's not where you want to be. So coming up, we're going to discuss whether the Bruins should be sellers or buyers, what they have to offer. And later on, we will preview tonight's game against the New York Islanders. Let's be honest, most of us can't even name all our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why people are starting to use Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. It can help you organize your accounts, track your spending, and get a better handle on your investments without having to touch a dreaded spreadsheet. Monarch's visual dashboards and smart tools make it so much easier to understand where your money's going and how to make it work for you. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. So I was looking at The Athletic this morning, and they had an article about playoff contenders, pretenders, and they actually mentioned the Bruins and tonight's opponent, the New York Islanders, in kind of the same vein. They write, the Bruins, like the Islanders, are also in the midst of a retool that began when management sold at last year's trade deadline. Their core players of Pastrnak, Swayman, McAvoy have pushed them higher than the standings than anticipated. Of course, McAvoy is out for a while now after that facial surgery, but they continue along with Morgan Geekie, Nikita Zadorov, and new coach Marco Sturm. But whether the Bruins and Islanders maintain their standing in the top 8 in the East depends on two things. Whether expected contenders can get it together and knock these teams out of the way, meaning the Florida Panthers, who are without Matthew Tkachuk, Alexander Barkov, the Toronto Maple Leafs, for example, the Capitals, the Rangers, two teams who were supposed to be more competitive in the Metropolitan Division. The second factor is whether they are committed to continuing the retool process. The Islanders could move pending free agents Anders Lee, JG Pajot, Casey Cizikas, among others. Boston doesn't have as many rental players to flip, but it could continue what was started last spring to keep the big picture in mind. So that's the question right now. Do the Bruins take a look at the standings? They're technically third in the Atlantic Division, but in terms of point percentage, they're actually 6th, 13th in the Eastern Conference. You could theoretically, with Charlie McAvoy back in the lineup, you get Casey Mittelstadt back, you get Victor Arvidsson back, and you could try to do a move that would strengthen your chances of making the playoffs this season. Or you stick to the retool, effectively wasting another one of David Pastrnak's prime seasons, as well as Morgan Geekie's suddenly elite goal scoring, Jeremy Swayman's resurgence, etc. And you say, nope, let's continue this retool. We have another opportunity to get some pretty high draft picks, one of our own, and potentially as high as the 6th overall pick from the Maple Leafs. Stay the course, retool. They could effectively sell Casey Mittelstadt. You look back to what Kyprios was saying about Brandon Carlo having this playoff run and another left on his contract. That's valuable. It's not a rental. It's a more of a significant investment. Same with Pavel Zacha, who would be more attractive because he's making only $4.75 million compared to Mittelstadt's $5.75. You have other guys in the same boat, like Sean Corrali, Mikey Eyssimont, both of whom have 2 years, well, this year and next, remaining on their contract. The only, UFAs that are clear sells would be Victor Arvidsson, maybe Andrew Peeke, if you don't have an appetite to re-sign him. But those are the two guys that are like set to come off the books that you probably will wonder whether or not you want to keep them. Riley Tufte, Jeffrey Viel are both unrestricted free agents, as are Matej Blumel and Alex Steeves, Group 6 unrestricted free agents. Jonathan Aspero, Michael Callahan, you're probably not going to get a lot for them. What you could do, though, is dangle some of your younger guys who haven't quite been able to make the jump, but who other teams may covet. I saw an interesting post on X this morning. I believe it was from Robert Chalmers, who said it's reported that Fabian Lysell has switched agents. He's now repped by Wii Sport. Lysell has 12 points in 13 games for Providence to start the season. Only played 12 games since being drafted in the first round in 2021. Perhaps he is switching agents in order to either press the Bruins to play him or move him. That's often the case when a player switches agents. They're looking for not just a change in representation, but perhaps also a change in scenery. And again, that's from @Ivan on X. Something to keep in mind. It's not just Lysell, though. Perhaps you look to move Matt Poitras if you don't think he can make the jump. You've got Elias Lindholm signed long-term. You have James Higgins coming up perhaps as early as the end of this college season. Fraser Minton appears to be locked into the third-line center role. Where exactly does Poitras fit in to the mix at this point? You have who else down there? Georgi Merkulov. You have Brett Harrison, Dan Schlock-Mellis, some of the more established prospects where we have also the BC boys showing a lot of promise in Higgins, Dean Letourneau, Will Smith, all going to be challenging for roles coming up in the next couple of years. So do you hold on to these guys or do you dangle them in bigger deals? It can still be in that retooling vein, right? You can make trades now that are setting you up for bigger success down the line. And if you look back at Kipper's trade board, there are some players who could fit that mold. For example, Brad Lambert, Winnipeg. His representation has given permission by the Jets to find a trade partner for that 21-year-old who had limited minutes with Winnipeg this season. Just 8 total games between the NHL and AHL this season. 30th overall pick in 2022. Hasn't been able to crack the NHL full-time yet, but has the potential to do so. That sounds familiar. Maybe there's some flippability there. You also have a guy like Connor Garland in Vancouver, who has long been reported to be tied to the Bruins because of the local ties there. Elias Pettersson, probably a bit too rich for them. Maybe they look at a guy like Kiefer Sherwood, who's been on fire to start this season. Final year of his contract, looking for at least $30 million over 6 years, similar to what Morgan Geekie is making. All this to say, the Bruins have to make a decision sooner or later as to whether they are going to stay the course with this group, whether they're going to continue the retool, perhaps sell off some players in order to get younger. I mean, Sean Corrali is like the oldest player on this team right now, so they're not in the same position they were last year where they have clear older guys that can be moved out. They have some pieces. Who knows if there's a huge market for a guy like Mittelstadt or Andrew Peeke, or I know we could get a lot for Pavel Zacha. Or do they say, we want to see if we can stay in the mix. We owe it to David Pastrnak, Jeremy Swayman, Charlie McAvoy, not to mention Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, who signed with the Bruins with not the promise per se, but the at least belief that they were going to be playing meaningful games in the spring and not just transitioning between eras here. Nikita Zadorov, Elias Lindholm want to play meaningful playoff hockey in Boston. You sign those two guys long term. I don't think they signed up for a rebuild or even an extended retool. So my sense is they're going to hold for now and see what the market is. Maybe they can do one of Don Sweeney's kind of hockey trades where they are moving some pieces out, but bringing in some guys that they can maintain long-term and perhaps convince to be part of the Bruins' future as we enter kind of this new era with some younger guys coming up and solidifying spots on this team. Tonight's game will go a long way to determining where the Bruins feel they are. Thanksgiving is usually a measuring point for teams who are outside the playoff picture. Although, again, it is super tight. The Bruins will be on Long Island tonight to take on the New York Islanders, and that is a game we will preview here as the podcast continues. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed tip-off or want to ride the hot hand through the second, third, and fourth quarters, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. You can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And it's not just the NBA. You can put $5 down on tonight's Bruins-Islanders game. The over-under is set at 5.5 goals. If it hits, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the FanDuel app. So head to FanDuel.com, sign up, play your game with the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Bruins, Islanders tonight on Long Island. It's a pivotal game for both of these teams. The Islanders coming in 13-8-2. The Bruins are 13-11. The Bruins have actually taken both games so far between these two teams. It's the third and final game. The Bruins won 5-2 back on October 28th. They won 4-3 in a shootout on November 4th. And here we are on the 26th. Reunited, and the Bruins have an opportunity to put some distance between themselves and another team looking to challenge for at least a wild card spot in the Eastern Conference. These two teams in the conference are separated by 2 points. The Islanders, 28 points, a .609 point percentage with a +5 goal differential, which is pretty impressive. The Bruins, 26 points, .542 point percentage, and a -2 goal differential. The Islanders are coming off a shootout win over the Seattle Kraken. It was a 1-0 shootout decision. So double shutouts for the goalies. Only a couple goals scored in the shootouts. Ilya Sorokin and David Rittich with tandem .905 save percentages for the Islanders. Right now, Jeremy Swayman has rebounded very nicely this season. He's got a save percentage of .909, which is just around back to his career average of .910. And even in the loss the other night against San Jose, posted a .933 save percentage. They should be riding him right now because Jonas Korpisalo, .878 point percentage. So that's just so bad. And it's coming to the point where I would not mind seeing him being assigned to Providence and they recall Michael DiPietro. When it comes to scoring over the past 5 games, the Islanders are led by Bo Horvat with 2 goals in 5 games. 4 points from Kyle Palmieri. The Bruins have 5 goals from Morgan Geekie over their past 5 games. David Pastrnak with 5 assists. Both players lead in those categories as well as points over the past 5 games. For the Islanders, Bo Horvat's their top scorer, 25 points so far this season, the only one at or above a point per game. Matt Barzal, Kyle Palmieri, Emil Heineman, Jonathan Drouin, Anders Lee, JG Pajot, always dangerous. On the blue line, they're without Alexander Romanov, who's injured after that Mikko Rantanen hit. He's going to be out for 5 to 6 months. A huge loss for them on the blue line. He's a defenseman machine. He had 31 blocks so far this season. And the guy to watch out for, of course, is first overall pick Matthew Schaefer, who's the odds-on favorite for the Calder Trophy right now. All right, let's do a tale of the tape. The Islanders' power play right now is 32nd ranked in the NHL. The Bruins have had penalty issues as of late. Even if they do take some penalties tonight, the Islanders aren't super dangerous on the power play, but still, you don't want to give them opportunities to find their game. The Bruins are the 4th ranked power play team right now at 25.6%. Full credit to Steve Spott for turning that unit around. Penalty killing wise, Islanders are 9th. The Bruins are 10th. Just around 83% for both teams. They're also very even in face-off percentage. Bruins are 10th. Islanders are 11th. The Bruins right now allowing more goals than they're scoring, which is a problem in hockey because that's the whole point of the game. 3.08 goals per game. 16th ranked, and then 3.21 goals allowed, which is 22nd. The Islanders have the 20th ranked goals for per game at 3.04. Stingier defensively, 2.78. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a low-scoring game. Going back to that over-under, it is at 5.5. We could see, Morgan Geekie continue to roll. David Pastrnak, Pavel Zacha. Those are your top 3 offensive guys for the Bruins. A bit of a drop-off after that. Only Mikey Eyssimont has double-digit points among active players right now. Although Mason Lohrei also has 10 points on the blue line. He really needs to step up in Charlie McAvoy's absence, at least offensively. He's only got like 2 shots in his past 5 games with 1 goal back on the 15th against Montreal. So if we're looking at X factors for tonight's game, I'm looking at Mason Lohrei for the Bruins, Matthew Schaefer on the blue line for the Islanders. 7 p.m. puck drop. I'll be sure to drop a reaction on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram after the game. So be sure to be following there. On tomorrow's podcast, we'll recap tonight's game as well as offer some things that we're thankful for with the Boston Bruins. If you have any thoughts there, please hit me up on social at Locked NHL Bruins or in the YouTube comments. What are you thankful for Bruins-wise so far this season? Thank you again for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL Game Night podcast. Every game, every night, broken down until the Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Local analysis on a national scale. You can find NHL Game Night. Same with Locked On Boston Bruins. Please do subscribe if you have not done so already. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Please take care of yourselves, friends. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.